Did you come with a sense of anticipation today? Is that what it is? Oh, yeah. Did you come ready? Yeah, I get it. Well, good morning to you, Freedom House. Good morning to you if you are online with us, wherever you find yourselves this morning. If it's your first time, my name is Heather, and I get the privilege of being the pastor here at Freedom House, and we are just so grateful that you would choose to trust us with the next hour of your morning. So welcome. This is the final day in a series called "Is It Just Me?" Is it just me? Because is it just me? That's a question that at some point every single one of us have asked ourselves. Is it just me? We've been talking about what science and psychology is calling an epidemic of loneliness. That we have a country, a people that feel lonely, that feel like they're all alone in one or more of the environments that they're a part of. But then everybody thinks it's just them. They look around at other people who seem to be enjoying life, or they have community, or they belong to things, and they think, well, it must just be me. One of the greatest contributors to loneliness and isolation is what we're going to talk about today. Maybe the thing that leads to the deepest and widest feelings of loneliness, and that is conflict. Conflict. Now, before we move on, I'd like to take the temperature in the room when I say the word conflict. Now, maybe you've heard, there tend to be three responses to conflict. You have some of you in the room that when conflict occurs, you're ready to go toe-to-toe. You are the fight people. You don't shy away from conflict. It doesn't bother you. You may or may not go looking for it, but when it comes to fight, flight, or freeze, you are the fight. How many of you, that's you? It doesn't bother you. Just raise your hand. I know. That's how you know you are a fight person, because you didn't even hesitate. That's me. That's right. But then, fight, flight, or freeze. There's the flight people, where a conflict arises and your first compulsion is to go, okay, thanks though. And just get away from it as fast as you can. How many of you are the flight people? You're like, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Okay, and then we have those of you that are freeze. Conflict happens and you're like, I'm just going to pretend like it's not happening. Maybe if I'm just still, I don't say anything, I just look, it will end soon. If they notice I'm not participating, it'll just be over very, very quickly. How many of you are freeze? Yeah, okay. Okay, well, I have to say, the bulk of the room is flight. Like, most of you raised your hand when I said flight, and I think that's true, really, of most of humanity. When conflict occurs, the majority of people don't want to be wherever it is happening. They want to get away from it. They don't want to be a part of it. And mostly because we don't know how to engage it. How do we engage conflict in a healthy manner that doesn't leave us feeling lonely and isolated? Now, why does conflict lead to loneliness? Because conflict separates people. Conflict builds walls, doesn't it? And extended, repeated conflict adds layer after layer after layer to the wall until eventually we have a fortress built around us or between us and another person, and it leads to loneliness. And we don't know how to get over the wall, through the wall, around the wall, and we think, is it just me? But conflict is a part of every single community, okay? You can't, as much as we would love to escape it, you cannot. You cannot escape conflict. It happens in friendships. How many of you have had a friendship conflict? Okay. How many of you have had a marital conflict? How many of you had a marital conflict this morning? My husband and I's hands are up. We did. We hugged it out before I walked up. And you think I'm kidding. This is not an illustration. This is just true. We had a little conflict this morning. I'm even more angry that I have to preach on conflict while I'm in a conflict. And don't think I didn't text that to him this morning. I have to preach on conflict. And here we are. Anyway, okay. So he comes in. We hug it out. Right? Conflict. How many of you have had a conflict in the church? What? In the church? Isn't the church supposed to be perfect? Isn't everyone supposed to agree in a church? How can there possibly be conflict in a church? I always tell people, if you ever discover a perfect church that is exactly the way you want it, do not attend, because you and your imperfect self will jack up whatever synergy they have managed to achieve. Conflict is inevitable. And when it happens, it can cause fractures and breaks to a relationship. You've experienced this. You've experienced where you have a relationship with whomever. It can be marriage, it can be friendship, it can be family. How many of you have ever had a conflict in your family? How many of you have had a conflict in your family and your family doesn't know you have the conflict? Right? Isn't that the best? It's the best kind. Okay, how do they not know? They don't know. Okay. You have a conflict. And this thing that was supposed to be held together and in perfect unity, something happens. And it causes a fracture. It causes a break. I should have practiced that beforehand. So sorry. He's giving me the evil eye now. I didn't mean for it. It's not. Anyway, okay. So now this thing is missing a crucial component, right? But it's still enough to be used. It's still enough to hold the thing, maybe the coffee or it's still enough to maintain the relationship. So one conflict. So it's imperfect, now we know that, yet usable. Until the next conflict, right? Don't worry. The front 3 rows literally just covered their faces. Because what happens, right? What happens if I make the next fracture from the conflict? Well, honestly, it's a little unpredictable, isn't it? I mean, maybe a small part will come off. Maybe the whole thing will shatter. Maybe just the top half. You don't really know. Will it be usable? Maybe. Maybe not. It's just honestly tragic that something like conflict has become like a hammer. Because conflict is inevitable because we're humans. And we have different stories, we have different belief systems, we have different preferences, we have different likes and dislikes. And so conflict is inevitable. But we get to choose what conflict does to the relationships that we have. Whether it is like taking a hammer to the conflict, or I'd like to give you an alternative, okay? Back in college, when I first started college, I was an art major. I love art. I love being creative. And one of the things that I learned about was an ancient Japanese form of art called kintsugi. This vase, at one time, was in pieces. It was a blue vase that had been broken. And the art of kintsugi is to take gold, silver, bronze, or platinum, to create a lacquer, if you will, and piece the broken pottery back together. And it operates as the seal between the pieces. And what's interesting about kintsugi art is that this vase is worth more now than it was before it was broken and repaired with the metal. You could probably pick up a vase like this at Walmart for $10 or less. This was not $10 or less. But why? It's because what broke it didn't get viewed as an opportunity for isolation or destruction or to be thrown in the trash. It got viewed as a way to create something more valuable, more beautiful. This is not that, but there are kintsugi pieces out there that are worth millions of dollars because of the intricacy of what it took to put them back together. So I want to invite you today to consider that you can choose one of two paths with conflict. It can be a hammer that causes fractures and breaks to your relationship, or you can allow conflict and the breaks that it causes to become something that makes your relationship better, more beautiful, and more valuable than it ever was before. Okay? Conflict can create deeper connection. It can. You know, whenever I've done premarital counseling with newlyweds, I remember I had a young couple. They're so wonderful because they're so, everything's ideal. And they come in and we're going to go through premarital counseling. And they told me that they'd never had a conflict in their relationship. And I looked at them and I said to them, you're not ready to get married then. They didn't like that. Because I was thinking, until you know what a person does and what they're like in conflict, until you know what someone will do and how they will respond when a crack occurs, when a fracture happens, you don't really know the person. Until a hammer gets taken to someone's life and you see what comes out, you don't know a person. But conflict can deepen connection. It can if you push through it, if you're willing to do the really, really difficult thing. This is tedious, time-consuming work. Conflict can bring healing. Conflict can build strength. It can build resilience. Conflict can make a relationship more valuable than it was before. So I have 3 questions I want to give to you today. Questions for you to consider. In fact, you might even, not out loud, but just in your mind, think of a current conflict in your life. Maybe the person you're in conflict knows you're in the conflict. Maybe they don't. Maybe you just have something internal inside of you that is in a battle with someone else. But I want you to consider it. If you don't have a current conflict, oh, you will. I feel pretty confident in saying that. And so I want to ask you 3 questions today and unpack them. When you are in a conflict, here's the first question to ask yourself. It is this: what am I fighting for? What am I fighting for? Doesn't matter what the conflict is over, however small or large of a thing. What am I fighting for? In Philippians chapter 2, I want to take you to something that Paul wrote in a letter. He writes, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being what? Like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Now, this is difficult when you're in a conflict where you do not believe you are like-minded. In fact, you feel the other person's mind might not be all there. And Paul is saying, let me paraphrase. I like to sometimes imagine, wonder what they sounded like when they said this. I feel like Paul went, look, if you have any encouragement at all, if there's anything I have ever done for you or said to you that has made you feel encouraged, if there's anything I've ever done or said to you that has given you any joy, if there's anything I've ever done for you or that Jesus has given to you and you've taken any comfort for it, could you just be an adult and be unified and be of one mind and one purpose? Because he says you are one in spirit and you have the same love. If you are a Christian, the love of Christ should reside within you, making it possible to be unified while in the midst of a difference. Are you with me? You can have different thoughts, different opinions. You can even have different beliefs, like core beliefs, and yet be of one mind and one purpose. How can Jeff and I be in conflict? We're actually still a little bit, but it's okay. It's okay. You know why? Because we are of one mind that our marriage and our relationship matters more than any conflict. So I'm not going to I was going to say be poopy. I don't know if that. I don't know. It's not in my notes. I can do that. And the human part of me wants to do that. I think the human part of him probably wants to do that. But we have a greater mission in our life. We have a greater purpose for our marriage. We have love for one another. And that supersedes all of it. And we know we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out. It's going to be fine. Because you can be of one love, one spirit, one mind in the midst of conflict. And that's what Paul is saying. So you have to ask yourself, what are you fighting for in a conflict? Are you fighting for the relationship? Or are you fighting for yourself? Are you fighting to be heard? Are you fighting to be right? Are you fighting to be seen? And I'm not saying that any of those things are necessarily bad. What I'm saying is that what has to be first priority is that you're fighting for the relationship, because that is the filter that allows you then to process and figure out what to say about the other things. So back in the day, early 2000s, I was a teacher. I used to be a teacher. I was an English teacher at a school, and there was a fellow English teacher there, and she and I had become good friends. Her classrooms were across the hall from one another, and her name was Corey, and we would, have conversations, and we'd spend our breaks together. We'd hang out and do things on the weekend. We just really became good friends. And I was also simultaneously, this is about to shock you, of anything I've said today, this is going to blow your mind. I was a cheerleading coach. That's right. This girl. I was a cheerleading coach of a competition cheerleading squad. And the girls, they would perform at half times of the football games, or they would perform at pep rallies, things like that. And the cheerleading squad had uniforms, and my friend Corey decided she felt that the new uniforms for the cheerleaders were not modest enough, that the skirts were too short, and she just didn't feel that they were appropriate. So she has this opinion. I have an opinion. Unfortunately, Corey decided, because I had my opinion and she had her opinion, that she didn't want to be my friend anymore, and she felt that I didn't follow the Lord like I should. And I know that this sounds extreme. I get it. I know that her story is one of, extremely conservative, kind of fundamental, legalistic background religion. And I knew that about her. And I think it was just a really hard thing for her to align something she didn't agree with who I am as a person. And so I remember trying so hard. I remember trying to have conversation after conversation after conversation. Can't we just agree to disagree? Can't we, does this have to be the thing where I remember asking her, do you honestly feel like we literally just cannot be friends over a cheerleading uniform? And I remember her saying, I just don't think I can. Because it's a reflection, Heather, of who you are. And I don't know if I can be friends with that kind of person. It mattered a lot to me. She was my friend. And so I remember I went to an older woman. At the time, I was in my 20s, and I went to an older woman that worked at our school. She kind of worked in sort of a guidance counselor type of role. She was a godly woman. And I asked her, because, the Bible talks about take someone with you. I thought maybe if we sat with another person that cared about us and loved us, that we could come to some kind of, understanding. And so we invited her, and we sat down, in this meeting with this other woman, and essentially just had the same conversation. And this woman's trying to help navigate this and help both parties kind of see the other person's point of view, because sometimes an objective third party is helpful. Because when you're in a conflict and you're unwilling to see the other person's point of view, a third party can step back and help the communication barrier. And after just a ton of going back and forth, finally, Corey says, and she's got some tears coming down her eyes, she says, honestly, Heather, I just feel like you're so busy right now, and I just don't feel like you care about our friendship anymore. So this is what it's about. So this is the thing. Well, let's talk about this, right? Let's talk about what the thing is under the thing. Because I want to fight for this friendship. I want to fight for this relationship. So what's under the thing? See, I think that if we all were honest with each other about what the thing under the thing really is, we would see a lot more of this. I mean, how many times have you been in a fight with someone or an argument with someone, and sometimes you can't even really remember what the fight is about, you just know you're angry. Or how many times in an argument have you been able to actually set your pride aside and go, you know what? It's not even about X. Feel this. See, you do that, you get honest when you're fighting for the relationship and not about being right. Easily could have been like, well, you know what? You don't like the uniforms? Too bad, so sad. And grow up. I could have done a number of things. And it's not that there weren't times internally I was like, really? But she'd been my friend. And I'm sure you know this, but good friends are really hard to come by, right? What are you fighting for? We did an entire sermon series called No Offense. If you were here for that. If you're not, you can actually go on YouTube and watch the whole thing. The entire sermon series, this was a couple of months ago, was on being offended and how we behave and how we interact with one another when we feel angry, hurt, betrayed, misjudged, misrepresented. And that the bait of Satan is offense. The fastest way that the enemy takes a hammer to your relationship is when he can get you offended and keep you offended, keep you hurt, keep you wounded, keep you fighting for yourself rather than for the relationship. How many of us hold on to offense because it feels like to let go almost gives permission to the person to hurt us again? I do have to tell you, when you let go of offense, when you refuse to let the wall get another layer of bricks, you are risking being hurt again. Absolutely. But you're also risking, by keeping the wall built, being isolated and feeling unloved and not experiencing forgiveness and not experiencing the restoration and the increase in value of your relationship that could happen if you would just lower your pride. Paul continues to write, verse 3 and 4. He says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Let me say that again. Value others above yourselves. And it says in humility, because that's what it takes. We don't naturally do that. We have to humble ourselves. And there are no qualifiers here. It says not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. There are no qualifiers that say unless they're selfish, right? Or unless they're wrong. And if they're wrong, well then, pony up. It doesn't say that. Because apparently it doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong. It just says to view other people as more than ourselves, and in humility, look to their interests. How can I be Jesus in this moment? How can I show them who Jesus is in this moment? So again, what are you fighting for? Well, and you got to be honest with yourself. I mean, you just do. Second question. Who am I fighting with? So what am I fighting for? And then who am I actually fighting with? Who is the real enemy in conflict? Well, Ephesians 6:12, some of you are already tracking with me, says, for we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. I've told you this before. Do you know when Jeff and I always get into a fight? On Saturdays. Usually Saturday morning or something, and we're so mad, and then we're even more angry. It's on a Saturday. We want to be resting, but you don't understand that I'm right and you're wrong. Anyway, I'm kidding. There is an enemy. Listen, there is an enemy that the Bible says that he only wants to destroy you. He wants to take a hammer to your marriage, to your family, to your relationships, to the church. This is what he wants to do. And he will do it by keeping us all offended and keeping us in conflict, by keeping us blind to the fact that he exists. And we will begin to view other people as the one we're fighting. Sin exists in this world. Brokenness, trauma, disease, suffering, it all exists in this world and will until Jesus returns, and we can take it out on each other, or we can understand that the great healer is Jesus, and there is nothing that is beyond redemption. There is nothing that is beyond restoration. Listen to me. Some of you think that you are in a conflict right now and you are in a relationship that is beyond help. I am telling you, there is nothing that is beyond redemption and restoration if two people want to see it redeemed and restored and do the tedious, hard work that it takes to do it. So who are you fighting with? Do you look at this person in front of you and view them as your enemy? Or can you look at them and know that they don't even realize it? They may not even know it or intentionally be doing it, but the devil is using them to wreak havoc. Do you know that he's used you before? Do you know that he's come whispered some little words into your ear at one point that said, "You're going to let them talk to you that way? You're going to let them do that thing to you? Oh, you don't deserve that. Girl, you go get what you deserve. Or you go say what needs to be said. You go do what needs to be done." Right? And we're like, you're right. And guess what? The world is discipling you toward that. The world is discipling you and tell you, you know what, you just step up toe to toe and you get what you deserve. In the Old Testament law said that an eye for an eye. Wouldn't it be great if we lived in the Old Testament? You know, oh, what? Oh, you hurt me there, well, I'm going to hurt you there. Oh, you broke my nose, guess what I'm about to do to you? I mean, right? But you know what happened when Jesus came? Now, God had given that law. It was a God-given law. Eye for an eye. But here comes Jesus, and Jesus ushers in grace. And so we move from the law to unconditional love. And what does Jesus say? He says, oh, right, if someone takes your shirt, give them the coat off your back. Oh, if someone slaps you, turn the cheek. That's what Jesus says. Now, let me give a little addendum here. I'm talking about normal conflict. I know that there are scenarios and there are situations like there is abuse. There are dangerous scenarios. There are all kinds of scenarios that working through that conflict is not going to be possible. And I just need to say that because some of you are in the room and you're going to interpret what I'm saying, in a way that I'm not intending. I'm talking about normal everyday conflict that can be worked through. There are certainly always special circumstances that might require a different approach. But what I'm saying to you is we tend to take some of those things that can be pushed through, can be worked through, can be put back together, and we view them as unrepairable. In people as the enemy, there is something bigger at stake. We have spiritual opposition. Philippians 2, Paul keeps writing. In your relationships with other people, with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Jesus, fully God, the Son of God, could have said, I do not need this. I am tired of having to prove myself. I am tired of having to defend myself. I am tired of having to say the same things over and over again. I didn't commit the sin. I didn't do the thing. I am actually perfect. I am without flaw. Why would I go then and take on the consequences of other people's sin? Do you know that Jesus had a choice? He was not forced. And Jesus chose, it said, to humble himself by becoming obedient to death, by not needing to be right, but to care about the relationship. And he knew that we could never be in right relationship with him unless he did that for us. Sometimes the resolution of conflict means you just give up needing to be right. Being secure enough in who you are in Christ that if they think you're wrong, so what? Okay. Do you know how many people think I'm wrong on a daily basis? A good bit. When you're a follower of Jesus, you got to get up every day being willing to be misunderstood by somebody. And being okay with it. In fact, Jesus hung on the cross and said, Father, forgive them. They don't even know what they're doing. He's saying they don't even know that there's an enemy. Forgive them because they don't even know that this is a spiritual battle going on, that I'm here to defeat the devil. That I can die on this cross and I don't care whether they think I'm right or wrong. I'm going to do it because I know that at the end of this, I'm going to defeat the one that's really the problem. So who are you fighting with? What are you fighting for? Who are you fighting with? If you fight for you, you will lose. If you fight for God's kingdom, if you fight for his mission, if you fight to show someone who Jesus really is, if you fight to be of one mind, one heart, one purpose, one love, we all win. So, let's get practical, shall we? The third question. So how can I fight well? If conflict is inevitable, if it's going to happen, you can't run from it. You can't, throw punches. What do? Well, Paul continues to answer that question. In verse 14, he just straight up says, do everything without grumbling or arguing. Oh, man. What? Let me say it again. And I want you to fill the word. Do what? What? Do everything without grumbling or arguing. Children, I wish my children listening. Do everything without grumbling or arguing. Don't you wish you could go like little children and you're like, so, complaining, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Those kinds of things. Like, do everything without grumbling or arguing. Christians, do everything without grumbling or arguing. Men and women of God, do everything without grumbling or arguing. What? It's not Heather. It's in the Bible. I mean, it sounds like something I'd like to say, but it's in the Bible. It's Paul. Now listen, he keeps going. So that you may become blameless and pure children of God without fault in a warped, crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky, as you hold firmly to the word of life, and then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor in vain, but even if I am being poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. So too, you should be glad and rejoice with me. He's saying, look, we are not people that are to be grumbling and complaining as the world grumbles and complains. Because if we claim to be Jesus followers, we have the peace of God living within us. We have the power of God at our disposal. We have his love and his joy. And we are called to show people who he is. And can I tell you, doing that in the midst of conflict is truly one of the hardest things you will do. One of the most painful things you will do. One of the most tedious, time-consuming things you will ever do. But he says you'll shine like stars. He's saying be a light. Be different. As my kids have grown up and as we've parented, I've always held in my mind that whatever I do, whatever Jeff and I do, however we speak, however we interact with them when they mess up, when they've done something wrong, when there's a conflict, they will, without knowing it, apply that to who God is. Because we have a perfect heavenly Father, yet we're imperfect parents. But we are called to be a representation of the Father. So whatever we do will teach them what love is. Will teach them what grace is. And so what that has meant is that we've had to not focus on the behavior, but focus on the heart. Even when sometimes the behavior felt embarrassing as a parent, right? Well, I don't want people to think my kid this or my kid that, or they made this decision, or people are thinking, how can they not? But to go to them and say, I don't want to talk about what happened. I want to talk about why it happened. My Bella will always say, yeah, Mom doesn't want to talk about the what. She wants to talk about the why. Because the what is merely a symptom of the why. And the what will solve itself if you can get to the why. What's the thing under the thing? What's the thing under the thing? So here are some rules for how to make that happen. In a fight, here's some fighting rules, right? You're about to get in the ring, here you go. Never call names. Don't swear at people. It's degrading. You have to eliminate that as an option. And guess what? When you call someone a name, never, one time, do they go, oh, you know what? Now I think you were right. Thank you. Now, suddenly the fog has cleared. And I now see exactly how exactly what you were saying. Thank you so much. Never raise your voice. Don't yell. Really, when my kids would yell at each other when they were younger, and they would comment, well, so-and-so's not listening to me. And I'm like, well, you were yelling. How is that working out for you? When I was a teacher and I wanted my children's attention, my students, I did not yell. I got very, very quiet. Force them to tune in and pay attention. Don't yell. It doesn't get you heard. Scripture says a soft answer turns away wrath. If you raise the stakes, what do you think the other person's going to do? They're either going to raise the stakes or they're going to back away, and you're not going to get their true self anyway. Can't bully your way to resolution. Probably goes without saying, yeah, I'm going to say it. Never get physical. You don't get to put your hands on somebody because you disagree with them or because they've offended you. Listen, remember who you're fighting with. You're fighting not with them. You're fighting because the devil's trying to use them in your life. And when you physically harm someone, you are harming a child of God. Guess what happens if you harm one of my children? Well, someone needs to go lock me in a padded room because I will come find you. Guess how God feels when you harm one of his children? Don't get physical. Never say never or always. You never listen. You always do this. You've never. Do you know that's not even true? Never say never. Never say always. Never threaten. This is when we try and shock people into agreement. Well, if you do this, I'm leaving. Even though we have no intention at all of leaving. Married couples, how many times do you threaten divorce, yet you're not divorced? You know what? Don't say it unless you're willing to do it. Your words better mean something. And then when you start threatening stuff and you start saying stuff because you think it's going to shock someone into submission to you, first of all, it's fake submission, right? It's not even real. They don't really agree with you. They're just trying to get you to calm down or not do the thing that you threatened to do. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to tell so-and-so. I'm going to this, I'm going to that. Are you? It's never helpful. So how do you know if your anger is taken over and you've created a war? First sign is that you will be incredibly critical. Criticism will become a character trait. You'll tear down, pick apart, accuse. Instead of, hey, you said that you would do this and you didn't, so can you help me understand what happened? Instead of that, it becomes, you never do what you say you're going to do. Can you see the difference? Instead of help me understand what happened, this relationship matters to me. I want to figure this out. It's you, always, never, I'm gonna. Consistent criticism is debilitating. If you don't ever have anything positive to say, please just stop the negative because you don't have a balance. How else do you know if your anger is taken over? If you start to experience what's called contempt. You start to be disrespectful, condescending, disgusted, roll your eyes, sigh, sarcasm. That's all contempt. And none of it helps the conflict, does it? When you roll your eyes and no one agrees with you. When you sigh, I didn't sigh. I mean, how have you, right? Anyway. When you get defensive, your anger is taken over. When you refuse to listen, when you lead with pride, well, it's all her, it's all him, it's excuses. Well, it's only because of this, or I wouldn't have if this didn't happen. When there's an unwillingness to take ownership. And then finally, how do you know when your anger is taken over? You just withdraw. Withdrawal from a conflict is actually a form of control and manipulation. It doesn't make you the bigger person to just walk away in the midst of something. It means you're controlling the other person by shutting down and not allowing them to participate in the restoration and reconciliation of the relationship. You tracking? It's hard, tedious, painful work. But it's the only way to create something more valuable. Give me the love that Jeff and I have now over any kind of new love that hasn't weathered the storms and fought the battles and cleaned up the blood out on the battlefield. Give me this over any brand new shiny mug. Again, I'm not telling you there are not times that a relationship has to come to an end. I'm not telling you that there aren't times that a different prescription needs to be given for a situation. I know that. That's not what I'm doing. What I am telling you is that we give up too easily. We give up too quick. I want this to be a church that we can get upset with each other, but know that we're not going to lose the relationship. We're going to push through it. We're going to talk through it. We're going to disagree, but we're still going to be able to be of one mind and one heart and one mission. We're part of the Church of God Anderson movement, which is actually founded on that very thing. That people could be a part of the church and not agree on everything. And that if we did it like what Paul is writing and like what he's saying, this is what we would become. Conflict can create deeper connection. When you came in today, you were given a communion cup. Would you get that right now? Would you pull that out? When I was growing up, my parents made a decision, and I think, all parents make the best decisions. We make the best decisions we can at the time, right? We do the best we can with what we know at the time. And my parents made a decision when my brother and I were younger that they never wanted us to see them fight. They never wanted us to see them in conflict because they were afraid if we saw them in conflict or saw them fight that we would feel unstable or we would feel, we would question the relationship. So then when I got married and we had conflict, I was shocked. I truly felt like something is very wrong. We've made a mistake because there should not be conflict like this. So, we went to marriage counseling. We've had marriage counseling a few different times over our marriage. I'm always like, when couples can't come to a resolution, but they're unwilling to get marriage counseling, I don't get it. at least give it a shot. But we were in marriage counseling and learned that, it's actually normal to have conflict in marriage. That actually happens. And guess what? My parents had it. We just didn't see it. So we made the decision with our kids that we were going to let our kids know that we had conflict. Judah, have you ever seen us argue? He says yes. Because we wanted them to see us not only have conflict, but then see us come through it. We wanted them to be able to see. Now, there are some fights, don't worry, there are some fights that should not be had in front of children. But there are conflicts that we were willing to let them see, tension we were willing to let them feel. Because we knew, and we would say to them, we're going to get through this. Your dad and I, we're going to push through this. And then they would see the other side of it. And they would see two parents in love, and they would see two parents that have come through the conflict. And I think that's what Jesus wants with his church. And so before Jesus was arrested and taken and betrayed and then hung up on that cross for our sins, he gathered his very best friends around a table for dinner. And these were guys that were going to betray him. Peter was going to deny knowing him. Judas had already sold him out. Every single one of those disciples, when he hung up on the cross, were going to run for fear of their own life. They were going to forget the mission. They were going to forget his promises, forget the miracles they'd seen, forget it all. And he gathered them around the table, and there would have been quite a spread, and there would have been a cup there full of wine. At that time, this is juice, but would have been full of wine, and there would have been a loaf of unleavened bread on the table. And in that day, in ancient times, you couldn't break bread with someone. You couldn't eat someone. You were not allowed to unless you were at peace with them, unless there was no conflict. So when Jesus took the bread and broke it and said to them, "This is my body broken for you. Every time you eat this, you remember this moment." What he was saying was, I forgive you ahead of time. We are good. We are at peace, and you're going to mess up, and you're going to deny me, and all of those things. But when it happens and you wonder where we stand, you remember. As he took the cup and said, "This is my blood shed for you. Every time you drink this, you remember." Because Peter, you're going to wonder if your denial of me will make me reject you. And Matthew and James, when you run from the scene, you're going to wonder if we'll ever be right again. Don't forget this moment. That we are of one mind and one mission and one love. And forgiveness covers it all. So in a moment, the band is going to play. They're going to lead us in a song. I chose to do communion today with to-go cups on purpose, because some of you may need to take this to go. You may need to go apologize for something. You may need to go make a conflict right. You may need to restore something, to take a step before you can take part in the act that says, I'm at peace with everyone. And guess what? That's okay. We're not here to just go through motions. You might need to go have the conversation and then go home and take part in communion, just you and the Lord. And that's okay. But if it's something you feel like you're ready to do today as the band plays, I would invite you to just peel off the top layer, eat the bread, peel off the second layer, partake of the juice. If there's anything for you to make right with the Lord, do it. So, Father, as we do this right now, as we take part in communion, Lord, may we be of one mind, of one purpose, of one heart. Thank you for your love and thank you for your forgiveness. In your name I pray. Amen. You can partake as you're ready, and then you can join with the band as we worship.